Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut, a biweekly conversation with which AARP staff and volunteers talk to Connecticut decision makers about policy and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach at AARP Connecticut. I'm very pleased today to be joined by one of our great AARP Connecticut volunteers, Jim O'Brien. Hey, thanks for being with us today, Jim. And why don't you tell the folks what you do for AARP and a little bit about yourself as well?
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me. I'm an AARP volunteer. I've been a volunteer with AARP for close to 13 years. I live in Cheshire, and I'm very happy to participate today because I'm a big fan of the League of Women Voters and what it has done over these years to promote women's voting, participation in elections, and voting by everybody who qualifies. I'm lead volunteer for election issues at this time and federal issues as well. Thank you.
And you do a great deal of work for us, and we appreciate all that you and all of our great AARP volunteers, Jim. So thank you so much.
To be engaged.
Yes, absolutely. So with that, it's also my pleasure to welcome Laura Smits. And as you mentioned, she is with the League of Women Voters. In fact, she's the president of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. So Laura, why don't you tell us a little bit about the League of Women Voters and their mission?
Okay, John, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with AARP and Jim and the whole group over at AARP are big supporters of the League, and we really appreciate all of that. So the League started out in 1920 when women won the right to vote. It was a long struggle, as you know, and our initial voting did not include women of color. It just included white women. So ever since that day, we've been trying to pull in other disenfranchised voters to make sure that every eligible citizen, regardless of their gender, regardless of anything else, their orientation, they can vote and they understand on a nonpartisan way the issues. We are not about candidates, we are about the issues. And we want folks to be educated when they vote so that when they vote, they know all about where a candidate stands on an issue because we've given them nonpartisan information about that issue so they can go to their candidates and figure out which candidate works best for them and their values. So that's kind of what we've been doing is educating as well as registering voters. But we found that in the past few years, especially with the internet and all kinds of ways to register, that's not so much of our charge anymore. We definitely do it, but we find more and more that folks are already registered. And then what we do from there is tell them, okay, do you know the issues that are being voted on this year? And we go from there. We try to meet them where they are and go from there.
You know, that's so great, Laura. And I think that's why the AARP and the League work so well together because our missions on voter education are so similar with our nonpartisan stance and being about promoting information and education so you can get encouragement for people to exercise their franchise and do make informed decisions when they do go to vote. So that's really great. So Jim, why don't you take it from here for the next question of Laura?
Laura, would you tell us about how you became involved with the League? What is your background and how have you been engaged in prior elections?
Okay, well, it's actually a long story. I got involved in the League because I was a mom staying at home with my kids, and I had some friends who felt that I was an outspoken person and that perhaps I should not be on the PTO, that perhaps I should go find a place where that passion would be more appreciated. So they said, you should try the League of Women Voters. I think you'd have a good time there. So I ended up doing that. And that was in Weston, actually in Connecticut. And I ended up running for office from there. I got on the Board of Education. I got involved in elections in that way. And I also I didn't work on campaigns necessarily because obviously the League is nonpartisan, but we brought programs to Weston and that's how I got involved initially in the League. But I also because of my involvement in the League, and that's the other thing about the League people don't know, they encourage women to run for office. We encourage women to get out and run for office. And when you do that, you take a step back from the League, obviously, because you're running for office. But a lot of women have gotten involved in politics because of the League. So that's what I did. And after that, I became a registrar of voters, another nonpartisan gig. And from there, I became a moderator for elections, which I still do today, where I live in Norwalk today, and I'm still an elections moderator. And I'm very, very keen on explaining the Connecticut elections process to folks. That's one thing that we find since COVID, especially, and we worked with you guys during COVID, you'll know, is how much and how little people knew about how elections were done in Connecticut. Unless you go into the polls and vote yourself, you're not really too sure about absentee ballots. There's a whole bunch of little details and checks and balances in our system that people are unaware of. So that's kind of where I started. My background is in public relations and advertising. I've also been a radio host and done a couple of freelance writing projects. So I have I'm pretty much an out there person. I'm a people person. I'm not a crazy person for staying inside. I like to be out with the people. That's why it drew me to the league, because I could go and proselytize voting and getting turnout and making people register, and every eligible citizen has to vote and turn out. That's our big thing.
And, Laura, that's what's so great, especially being a former registrar. And I was a former registrar myself. And I know you had a great reputation as being one of the great, registrars in the state who was nonpartisan, which is, I always like to point out, that was the role of the registrar. Our job was
Right.
to make sure the voter files were straight and that people knew the rules, and we oversaw free, fair, and clean elections. And that's what I think we do a great job of here in Connecticut. And that's thanks to our registrars and our election workers in general at the local level. So that's really great. So let me ask you, so what are, you talked about the league and what its mission is. So we've got a big November election, November 8th this year, statewide election. I know the league is very engaged in promoting these elections. So what are some of the activities that the league's sponsoring for the upcoming November elections? And if people want to participate in those events, what are some of the ways they can go about doing that?
Okay, well, this year we're doing something a little different. We're getting involved because COVID is more or less behind us. Let's everybody, fingers crossed. We're doing a major debate series with Connecticut Public Television this year for the big races, for the district races, as well as the Secretary of the State's debate, which is actually coming up today, the 15th, at University of Hartford. And what we tried to do when we scheduled these debates was to do them in universities and community colleges, because we really, really want to reach out to young people to make sure that they understand the importance of voting. Pretty much in our age category, everybody knows that they're supposed to vote. And in the past 2 cycles, younger people have been coming out more and more, but certainly not anywhere near the levels that they should be, considering that they're the ones who the future is theirs. It's not ours. So that's why we went to the universities and to the colleges. So we'll be starting that series tonight. And then that will go through October, actually. Every week there will be at least one debate from now until October 27th. The last 2 will be October 25th, which is the senatorial debate. And the one after that is the 27th of October, the gubernatorial debate. And those will be at Fairfield University. That complete schedule can be viewed at the Connecticut Public's website. And you can also submit questions before those debates. And your questions are screened. When we do questions during debates, we screen them by a Republican member of our league and a Democratic member of our league, so that those questions are fair and can be asked by any candidate, not specific. So that's the biggest project that we're doing this year. We're going to be doing District 1, District 2. I don't think we have a District 3 for a bunch of reasons. District 4 and District 5. That whole schedule is on our website, as well as the Connecticut Public website, where you can submit questions. And we're going to have watch parties for those, and they can be live streamed on Facebook and NPR and Connecticut Public platforms. So it's good. That's one of our biggest events. Well, also our local leagues will be doing local state races. There are debates happening all over this state with some of the local leagues. And this year, for the first time in a long time, we've gotten a lot of pushback from some of the candidates in a few of the races who are not willing to participate in debates. And this is of grave concern to us. I wrote a blog post a few months ago now about the desire on some folks just not to participate in debates. And this is really disconcerting, because when you look at it, these are public servants. It's called public service. And the voters are the ones who elect those public servants. And a movement to not participate and engage with the voters that's not about public service. That's about self-service. And really, what are these folks afraid of? Why don't you want to debate your opponent? If you have something that you want to bring to the American public, you need to be able to engage, and you need to be able to defend those views with an opponent. So that's a really big concern of ours. So there'll be local debates in most of the cities and towns. Most of the local chapters are working hard right now. It seems like the summer was just like right away, right by. So that will be happening on the local level. We're also getting out at our voter registration and education tables the question on the ballot about early voting. That's a major, major big deal. We tried to do this, if you remember, John, a few years ago, and it didn't make it because the question was like a paragraph long, and nobody understood why we were asking the question. And because our laws are written in the Constitution, the question is basically, shall we amend the Connecticut State Constitution so that we can allow for early voting? And then we'll let the legislature take it from there.
So basically, since you brought that up, before I throw it to Jim, let's expand on that discussion. Well, first, let me ask you this. If people want to get information about all of the debates that the league is sponsoring with CPTV and they wanted to find out information, what is the website for the league?
It's lwvct.org.
Awesome. So for information about the upcoming debates or the activities of the league, they can go to lwvct.org.
Correct.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned the question, so let me ask you a little more about the question. So there is this big question, and it is going to be on the ballot. And, what are some of the things people have to look out for about the question, right? Because some towns have what they call a two-sided ballot, right? I mean, where will the question potentially be located on the ballot so people don't miss it because it's not at a place where all the candidates are listed?
Usually when there's a question on the ballot, and questions on the ballot, when they bring a question to the voters, as you know, John, it's always in the even years, right? We never do it during the municipals because if you've seen a municipal ballot, vote for 5, Board of Education, vote for 6, Board of Finance, that ballot is way too confusing. And frankly, voter turnout is lower. So you want to get a question on the ballot in the even years, which is why it's in 2022. And the question will be, usually it's right at the top before you hit any of the candidates. That's usually where the ballot question goes. Now, I can't say for all municipalities, will that be the same? It should be closer to the top. It may not be the first question because there might be a local question that is being asked of the voters too. So it's usually at the top of the ballot. I haven't seen any sample ballots. I don't think SOTS has gotten their act together on that so far because we still have, as a matter of fact, they're still counting petitions, I believe, for third-party candidates. So won't find it there. But the question is very simple this year. It's, shall the Constitution of the state be amended to permit the General Assembly to provide for early voting? So basically, all this is saying to the voters, it's a yes or no question. Shall we amend the Constitution? That's basically the question, because everything else will follow from there.
And we're not rewriting the state constitution, right? This is just, the Constitution basically says that in Connecticut, elections are on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which is determined to mean that no other day other than that day can be when you vote in person. But if a yes vote would take away that prohibition and allow the legislature to determine through their normal practice, how many days of early voting there are, how many locations each town must have, of what the hours of early voting should be, and those type of situations. So we're not writing early voting into the Constitution. We're taking away the prohibition against it. And we're only, I think, one of 6 states. Four states.
It used to be 6. Now it's one of 4.
And we're, a state that generally prides itself on having, an open elections process. And it amazes me to this day because of this technicality in our Constitution that we're not allowed to do that. So I just thought that warranted some really good discussion because, as you pointed out, Laura, it was on the Constitution several years ago, and it's a long, strenuous, changing the Constitution, even if it's minor like this, is a long, arduous process. And we've got the opportunity to become one less state that doesn't allow for this in-person early voting. So, Jim, let me turn it over to you, and you can ask our next question of Laura.
Laura, there have been numerous changes in voting rules over the past few years, especially since COVID. Can you remind us of some of these, especially how these changes may affect the November election?
Right. Well, Jim, actually, some of the changes, there have been some expansion of our no absentee ballot rules, because again, our no absentee ballot rules are written in our Constitution. Their election laws are written in our Constitution. So you can only, and as people found out, and John just mentioned, we're a progressive state. People were like, what do you mean we have to have an excuse to vote by absentee, right? So one of the things that COVID gave us, one of the good things about it, was we left in the excuse for fear of illness. So it doesn't have to be your own illness. It can be somebody else's illness. And that can be read as COVID. It could be read as anything. I mean, one of the things that keeps people from voting sometimes is they are afraid they're going to get sick from COVID, or they're afraid they're going to get their immune compromised. They don't want to go out into a giant crowd of people. So there's that. So the fear of illness is still on the application for an absentee ballot. So you can use that excuse. The other thing, and this also delves into, kind of goes with early voting, are all the folks who take care of elderly dementia patients who can't just pop in the car and go. Folks who take care of small children. Again, popping in the car and going is not an option. Folks who rely on public transportation. So that's one of the reasons why we have expanded an absentee ballot. And so that's the good news. And we are working towards, slowly but surely, the 2023 legislative session, we're going to try to push again for no excuse absentee ballot. Because why do we need an absentee? Why do we need excuse? We're eligible citizens. It should be more convenient and easier for us to vote. Why are we making it hard? So that's one of the things that's changed. The other thing that folks might not know about, that if you're permanently disabled, you can apply for a permanent absentee ballot. And that way you need a doctor's list, a doctor's letter, et cetera, but check with your registrar, because that's another way you'll automatically get mailed an absentee ballot and you won't have to go to the polls at all. Curbside voting is another option. People forget that you can, it's hard for you to get out of a car, but you can get in one. We can come out to you at the polling location to cast your ballot. And again, that's with one Republican and one Democrat doing that. So it's a very fair process. We don't encourage people to do that, but I'm always concerned when I see folks coming into my polling location and they can barely walk. And I understand the civic mindedness of that. I'm very, very impressed by that, but it's not always necessary to actually come physically into the polling location. We do have other options. Remember, our goal as polling officials is to make sure that every eligible citizen can vote. We do not like turning folks away. That's not the job.
Laura, what about those drop boxes that came in during COVID? Those are now permanent, correct?
Yes, that's true. The drop boxes are permanent, and those are for your absentee ballot applications as well as the absentee ballot itself. And just like a post office box, they're right there. They're usually in town halls, police stations. Some cities and towns might have more than one. I know Norwalk has two, one at the police station and one at City Hall. So those are another way that you can get your absentee ballot collected without having to worry about the mail or anything else. So the drop boxes are permanent and they are here to stay, and they're a really welcome addition. Another tool in our toolkit of getting folks voting.
Yeah, that's some great stuff, because we're going to be working with you guys again, and we worked with you on all those issues, but we're going to work with you again on the no excuse absentee balloting. I know that's a process we're going to have to go, and hopefully we can get that on the ballot in a few years as well. So let me ask. So let me ask you. You mentioned that. What is are some of the other priorities in 2023 in addition to no excuse absentee balloting for the league? What is there anything else you think you guys might be working on next year?
One of the things that we've been working on, especially in the past year or two, and we've noticed a really big increase in, is how to combat misinformation. There is so much on the internet in misinformation. There's just so many times, I can't even tell you how many times I've had conversations with folks that start out when they find out I was a registrar. They signed out I'm the League of Women Voters. Well, what about voter fraud? And I'm like, can you, okay, bring it. Just tell me. We don't have voter fraud in Connecticut. What do you mean? How do you know? There's 2,000 dead people. I said, here's the thing. We have our lists every January. We go through our list. We send every voter on that list a note asking them, are you still here? We're always updating our list. So when folks say, well, how many people voted who are, all these dead people voted? I said, well, let me ask you something. Just because there are certain people that are not in the state anymore, they're not even whatever. If you let me know when that dead person votes, because I think we have a bigger problem. It's called the zombie apocalypse. It's not something that's real. So they always want to know, well, where'd you get that information? I said, I don't know, the Connecticut Elections Enforcement Commission. They investigate every single thing of voter fraud or voter irregularities. There's actually no fraud. And it's usually a one-off, right? Somebody made a mistake. Some junior voted on his senior father's line or something like that. It's something very simple, nothing that would ever rise to the occasion of changing an election. But people will say, well, I saw it on the internet. I said, well, where'd you see it on the internet? Well, I saw it on this so-and-so.org. I said, was it a .org? Well, it was a .com. And then it was a .org. And I said, well, did you drill down? And they'll drill down. If you drill down on those things, it either can't answer the question, or when they do drill down, they realize that it's connected to somebody with a very big agenda to keep people from voting. So we're really concerned about misinformation and where folks get their material. So we're always very careful to make sure that people are going to really good sources with a .edu or a .org. Not that all .orgs are good, but It's one of those places where, if your information is coming from somebody's blog, including my own, it's still an opinion. It's not a fact-based situation. So misinformation is one of the big issues we're trying to combat with facts. And here's elections in Connecticut. We're not Georgia. We're not Arizona. We're Connecticut. We have checks and balances at every step of the process.
So Jim, why don't you just, we're coming close to time here. Why don't you ask our last question of Laura, and then we'll wrap things up here.
Laura, I understand that women and men after 1973 can participate and join the League of Women Voters. If people do, how do people go about joining? And once they join, what kind of things and activities are available to them?
Well, thanks, Jim, for the question. And we've always encouraged men to join us. People are like, well, why don't you change your name? Because it's not just women. I said, can we have one thing with our name in it? Is that okay? I go to the YMCA. I don't sit there and quiz them about why they let me in. So on our website, there is a local leagues section, which will tell you all of the leagues that are in Connecticut. There's over 20 of them. And we don't cover the entire state, but we cover most of it. And those local leagues include certain towns. Some leagues have 18 towns in them. I think Litchfield County has 18 towns. Other ones, like the Norwalk League, for example, it's just Norwalk because it's a city. So if you go to our website, there's local leagues there. And as a member of our league, you get information from League US about the issues, and you have access to those. But you also get to participate in the local drives, voter registration drives. We go into the high schools to talk to kids about voting. We also have programs about like election security, and sometimes we'll have discussions and talks about nonpartisanship and how to do that, as well as topics of interest to voters, such as, misinformation, for example, and this kind of thing. So get involved at the local level. We also encourage people, our members go to town meetings and city meetings so they can find out what's going on and bring those topics to the local community so that they know what's going on in their community. That's some of the things that we can do.
That's great. And so before we do wrap up, Laura, any last things you want to tell our audience about the elections, about the league, or anything like that?
I just want to make sure that everybody votes. Take someone with you. Make it a day. Go to lunch afterwards. Go, have a cocktail afterwards, whatever. It needs to be something that we just automatically do every season, every local election, every referendum. Vote, 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 because really it's the only voice that we have. Unless you're one of those lucky individuals who can write giant checks, your vote is really your voice. And I think it's really important to remind people of that.
Well, so thank you so much with that, Laura. Appreciate you and all the work that you do with the league and how we work together on so many issues. It's so great. I want to thank Jim O'Brien, one of our great volunteers who's involved in so much of the work, particularly around advocacy that AARP does here in Connecticut. And I also want to remind people, in addition to going to the league's website at lwvct.org, you can also get all the information you need about elections, how to vote, everything you need about elections in Connecticut at our elections voter guide website, which is aarp.org/ctvotes. And that's aarp.org/ctvotes. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning, and look forward to seeing you on our next edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you so much.